The key snapped in the lock with a sickening crack, and Elias Torres stood frozen, staring at the jagged metal stub in his hand. Snowflakes clung to his dark curls, melting into icy rivulets that slid down his neck, and the bitter Montana wind sliced through his thin jacket. He was locked out, alone, in a town where he barely knew a soul. It was his third week in Missoula, a place he'd chosen on a whim after leaving behind the suffocating expectations of his family in Chicago. The apartment, a cramped studio above a coffee shop, was supposed to be his fresh start. Now, as the sun dipped below the mountains, casting the street in a bruised purple hue, Elias felt the weight of his solitude. He jiggled the broken key in the lock, cursing under his breath, when a low, amused voice broke through the quiet. "Looks like you're in a bit of a bind, neighbor." Elias spun around, heart thudding. Leaning against the doorframe of the apartment across the hall was a man he'd only glimpsed in passing. A tall, broad-shouldered figure with tousled auburn hair and a jawline that could cut glass. His name was Caleb Hart, Elias recalled, from the mailbox labels. Caleb's green eyes glinted with something unreadable, and a wool blanket was slung over his arm like an offering. His smile, though warm, carried a spark of mischief that made Elias's stomach flip. Yeah, Elias stammered, holding up the broken key. "Guess I'm not getting in tonight." Caleb pushed off the doorframe, closing the distance between them in a few easy strides. "That's a rough one. You got a locksmith on speed dial, or are you just going to stand out here and turn into a popsicle?" His tone was teasing, but there was a gentleness in the way he tilted his head, sizing Elias up. Elias laughed, a nervous sound that fogged the air. "No locksmith. No plan. Just me and this useless key. Well, lucky for you. I'm the neighborly type." Caleb held out the blanket, his fingers brushing Elias's as he passed it over. The touch was fleeting but electric, sending a jolt through Elias's chilled skin. "Come on in. I've got coffee, a couch, and no plans to let you freeze out here." Elias hesitated, glancing at his locked door. He didn't know Caleb, not really. But the cold was creeping into his bones, and that smile, dangerous, yes, but also warm, promised something he hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. He wrapped the blanket around his shoulders and followed Caleb inside. The apartment was a stark contrast to the frigid street. Warm light spilled from a mismatched collection of lamps, casting a golden glow over bookshelves crammed with paperbacks and vinyl records. The air smelled of cedar and fresh coffee, and a small fireplace crackled in the corner. Elias sank onto a worn leather couch, clutching the blanket tighter, while Caleb disappeared into the kitchen. "You take it black, or are you one of those sugar and cream types?" Caleb called, his voice muffled by the clink of mugs. "Black's fine," Elias replied, his eyes wandering over the room. A guitar leaned against the wall, its strings catching the firelight. A framed photo showed Caleb with a group of friends, all laughing, their arms slung around each other. Elias felt a pang of envy. He hadn't had that kind of easy camaraderie in years, not since he'd started questioning who he was and what he wanted. Caleb returned with 2 steaming mugs, handing one to Elias before settling into an armchair across from him. "So, Elias, right? What's your story? You don't strike me as a Missoula native." Elias sipped the coffee, its warmth spreading through his chest. "Just moved here. Needed a change. Chicago was too much." Caleb raised an eyebrow, leaning forward. "Too much how?" Elias's throat tightened. He wasn't ready to spill his guts to a stranger, no matter how disarming his smile was. Growing up in a tight-knit Puerto Rican family, he'd learned to keep his truths buried deep, especially the ones about the feelings he'd never dared name. "Family stuff," he said finally, his voice low. "You know how it is." Caleb nodded, his gaze softening. "Yeah, I do." He didn't press, but the silence that followed felt heavy with understanding. For a moment, they just sat there, the fire popping softly, the world outside forgotten. Then Caleb leaned back, stretching his arms behind his head. "You're welcome to crash here tonight. I'll call a locksmith in the morning, unless you've got somewhere else to be." Elias shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Nowhere else. Thanks, Caleb. Don't mention it." Caleb's eyes lingered on him, that dangerous smile flickering again. Something tells me you're going to be an interesting neighbor. Elias's heart skipped, and he looked away, pretending to study his coffee. He didn't know what Caleb meant by that, or what he wanted it to mean. But as the firelight danced across the room, he felt a spark of something new, something that scared him as much as it thrilled him. For the first time in months, he wasn't alone. And that, he realized, was a dangerous thing in itself. The next morning, Elias woke to the smell of bacon and the soft strum of a guitar. He blinked, disoriented, the blanket still wrapped around him on Caleb's couch. Sunlight streamed through a window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. For a moment, he forgot the broken key, the locked door, the weight of his uncertain life. Then Caleb's voice, low and melodic, drifted from the kitchen, humming a tune Elias didn't recognize. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and caught sight of Caleb leaning against the counter, strumming a few chords on the guitar he'd seen last night. Caleb's flannel shirt was rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms dusted with freckles. He looked up, catching Elias's gaze, and grinned. "Morning, Sleeping Beauty. You snore, by the way." Elias flushed, running a hand through his tangled hair. "I do not. Keep telling yourself that." Caleb set the guitar down and slid a plate of bacon and eggs across the counter. "Eat. Locksmith's coming in an hour." Elias mumbled a thanks, his stomach growling as he took a bite. The food was simple but perfect, and he realized how long it had been since someone had cooked for him. Back in Chicago, meals were tense affairs, his mother's voice sharp with questions about his future, his father's silence heavier than words. He shook off the memory and glanced at Caleb, who was watching him with that same unreadable intensity. "So," Caleb said, leaning on the counter, "you gonna tell me what brought you to Missoula, or do I have to guess?" "I'm thinking runaway artist? Secret spy? Oh, wait, disgraced poet hiding from a scandal." Elias laughed, nearly choking on his eggs. "Nothing that exciting. I just needed space to figure things out." Caleb's smile softened, but his eyes didn't waver. "Figuring things out, huh? That's code for something big. You don't move halfway across the country for nothing." Elias shifted, the weight of Caleb's gaze making him feel exposed. He wasn't ready to talk about the nights he'd spent staring at the ceiling, wrestling with feelings he'd been taught to bury. The way his heart raced when he saw certain guys at college, the way he'd hidden it behind fake girlfriends and forced laughter. "It's complicated," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Caleb didn't push. Instead, he picked up his guitar again, plucking a soft melody. "Fair enough. But if you ever want to uncomplicate it, I'm a good listener." The locksmith arrived soon after, a gruff older man who grumbled about city folks as he worked on Elias's door. Caleb stood nearby, chatting with the man like they were old friends, his easy charm smoothing over the tension. When the door finally clicked open, Elias felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. He could go back to his empty apartment now, back to his solitary life. But Caleb's presence lingered like a melody he couldn't shake. "Thanks for everything," Elias said, handing back the blanket. Their fingers brushed again, and he felt that same electric jolt. "Anytime," Caleb replied, his voice low. "You know where to find me." Over the next few days, Elias tried to settle back into his routine, job hunting, unpacking boxes, avoiding his parents' calls. But Caleb was everywhere. A nod in the hallway, a wave from his balcony, a playlist blasting through the thin walls late at night. Each encounter left Elias more curious, more unsettled. He started noticing things, the way Caleb's laugh carried a hint of sadness, the way his eyes lingered just a second too long. One evening, restless and unable to sleep, Elias knocked on Caleb's door. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the loneliness, maybe it was the pull of that dangerous smile. Caleb answered, shirtless and holding a paintbrush, his chest streaked with blue and yellow. Behind him, a half-finished canvas glowed with abstract swirls. "Couldn't sleep?" Caleb asked, stepping aside to let Elias in. "Something like that." Elias's eyes darted to the painting, then back to Caleb. "You're an artist?" "Sometimes, when I'm not fixing locks or rescuing stranded neighbors." Caleb's grin was teasing, but there was a vulnerability in his eyes, like he was waiting for Elias to judge him. "It's incredible," Elias said, meaning it. The painting was chaotic yet beautiful, full of emotion he couldn't quite name. You're really talented. Caleb shrugged, setting the brush down. It's just a way to get the noise in my head out. You ever feel like that? Like there's too much inside you, and you don't know what to do with it? Elias's breath caught. He knew that feeling all too well. The pressure of secrets, the ache of wanting something he couldn't name. Yeah, he said softly. All the time. Caleb stepped closer, his voice dropping. Then maybe you should let it out sometime. With someone who gets it. The air between them crackled, and Elias's heart pounded. He wanted to say something, to close the distance, but fear held him back. He'd spent so long hiding, so long denying who he was. Could he really trust this stranger, this man with a dangerous smile and a heart that seemed to see right through him? Elias couldn't stop thinking about Caleb's words. They echoed in his mind as he lay awake that night, staring at the cracked ceiling of his studio apartment. The walls felt thinner now, as if Caleb's presence seeped through them, pulling Elias towards something he wasn't sure he was ready for. The next morning, he found a note slipped under his door, written in a messy scrawl. Coffee at the brew. 10 a.m., don't stand me up. See, Elias's pulse quickened. He didn't know if it was an invitation or a challenge, but he couldn't say no. He pulled on a sweater, shoved his hands in his pockets, and headed to the coffee shop downstairs. The brew was a cozy, cluttered space with mismatched chairs and the rich aroma of roasted beans. Caleb was already there, sprawled in a corner booth, his auburn hair catching the morning light. He waved Elias over, pushing a steaming latte across the table. Figured you for a latte guy, he said with a grin. Elias slid into the booth, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. You're making a lot of assumptions about me. Am I wrong? Caleb's eyes sparkled with that familiar mischief. Elias smirked, taking a sip. Not entirely. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing as easily as the coffee. Caleb shared stories of growing up in Missoula, of sneaking into dive bars with his older brother, of the time he hitchhiked to Seattle just to see a band play. Elias found himself opening up too, talking about Chicago's crowded streets, his mother's cooking, the pressure to be the perfect son. He stopped short of the deeper truths, but Caleb's attentive gaze made him feel like he could, someday. As they left the shop, snow flurries swirled around them, and Caleb nudged Elias's shoulder. You ever been to the river trail? It's quiet this time of year. Perfect for thinking. Elias hesitated, then nodded. Lead the way. The trail wound along the Clark Fork River, its banks dusted with snow, the water a deep, glassy blue. They walked in comfortable silence, their footsteps crunching in unison. Elias stole glances at Caleb, noticing the way his scarf hung loosely around his neck, the way his breath clouded the air. There was something magnetic about him, something that made Elias want to be closer, even if it scared him. You're quiet, Caleb said after a while, stopping to lean against a wooden railing. What's going on in that head of yours? Elias's throat tightened. He wanted to tell Caleb everything, about the nights he'd spent questioning himself, about the fear that kept him silent. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he said, just taking it all in. This place is beautiful. Caleb studied him, his expression unreadable. It is, but it's better with company. He paused, then added softly, you don't have to hide, you know. Not with me. Elias's heart stopped. Did Caleb know? Could he see the truth Elias had buried so deep? He opened his mouth to respond, but a shout from the trail ahead interrupted them. A group of teenagers barreled past, laughing and tossing snowballs. One clipped Elias's shoulder, and he stumbled, only for Caleb to catch his arm, steadying him. Careful, Caleb said, his hand lingering. Can't have you falling on me already. Elias laughed, but the warmth of Caleb's touch stayed with him, even after they resumed walking. That night, back in his apartment, he replayed the moment over and over, the brush of Caleb's hand, the weight of his words. He was falling, and not just into the snow. Days turned into weeks, and Elias and Caleb fell into a rhythm. Coffee dates, late-night talks, walks along the river. Caleb's apartment became a refuge, a place where Elias could breathe without the weight of expectations. But the closer they grew, the more Elias felt the tension building inside him. He was drawn to Caleb in a way he'd never allowed himself to feel before, and it terrified him. One evening, they sat on Caleb's couch, a half-empty pizza box between them, a movie playing in the background. Caleb was telling a story about a disastrous camping trip, his hands animated, his laugh infectious. Elias watched him, mesmerized, until Caleb caught his gaze and went still. "What?" Caleb asked, his voice soft but curious. Elias's mouth went dry. He wanted to say it, to admit the truth he'd been running from his whole life. But fear clawed at him, the echoes of his father's disapproval, his mother's prayers. Instead, he shook his head. "Nothing. Just you're a good storyteller." Caleb's smile faded slightly, like he knew Elias was holding back. "You sure that's all?" Elias nodded, but the lie felt heavy. He excused himself early, retreating to his apartment, where the silence pressed in around him. He was falling for Caleb, and it was tearing him apart. Could he risk everything, his family, his identity, for a chance at something real? The first crack in Elias's carefully built walls came on a Friday night, when Caleb invited him to a local art show. The gallery was a converted warehouse, its walls lined with vibrant paintings and sculptures that glowed under string lights. Caleb's work was on display, a series of abstract pieces that pulsed with color and emotion. Elias stood before one, a swirling mix of blues and reds, feeling like it mirrored the chaos inside him. "You like it?" Caleb asked, appearing at his side with 2 glasses of wine. "It's alive," Elias said, struggling to find words. "Like it's telling a story you can feel." Caleb's eyes softened. "That's the idea. Art's supposed to make you feel something, even if you don't know what it is." Elias nodded, his chest tight. He wanted to tell Caleb what he was feeling, how every moment with him felt like a brushstroke, vivid and terrifying. But the crowd around them, the clink of glasses, the hum of conversation, held him back. He sipped his wine, letting the moment pass. As they left the gallery, the night air was sharp, the stars piercing the Montana sky. Caleb suggested a detour to a nearby diner, and soon they were tucked into a booth, sharing a plate of fries and trading stories. Elias was laughing at one of Caleb's tales when a man approached their table, a tall, wiry guy with a buzz cut and a scowl. "Caleb Hart," the man said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Still pretending you're something you're not." Elias froze, the air suddenly heavy. Caleb's smile vanished, his jaw tightening. "Not now, Derek," he said, his tone low but firm. Derek sneered, glancing at Elias. "Who's this? Another one of your projects?" Elias's stomach churned, but Caleb stood, his presence commanding. "Walk away, Derek. We're not doing this." Derek laughed, a sharp, bitter sound, before turning and disappearing into the crowd. Elias looked at Caleb, questions burning in his mind, but Caleb just shook his head. Old history, not worth talking about. They walked home in silence, the easy warmth between them replaced by a tense undercurrent. When they reached their building, Caleb paused at his door. "Sorry about that. He's got issues." "You don't owe me an explanation," Elias said, though he wanted one. He wanted to know everything about Caleb, the good, the bad, the parts that made him flinch. Caleb's eyes met his, searching. "Maybe I want to give you one. Just not tonight." Elias nodded, but the encounter lingered, a shadow over their growing connection. The next day, he found himself at Caleb's door again, unable to stay away. Caleb was painting, his hands smeared with color, his expression distant. Elias sat on the couch, watching him work, the silence between them heavy but not uncomfortable. Finally, Caleb spoke, his voice low. "Derek and I used to be close. Real close. But he couldn't handle who I am. Who I love." Elias's heart stopped. The words hung in the air, raw and unguarded. Caleb was gay. The truth hit Elias like a wave, confirming what he'd sensed but hadn't dared name. He wanted to say something, to share his own truth, but fear choked him. Instead, he said, "I'm sorry. That sounds hard." Caleb set his brush down, turning to face him. "It was. But I'm done hiding. Life's too short for that." His eyes locked onto Elias's, steady and unflinching. "What about you, Elias? What are you hiding from?" The question cut deep, and Elias felt his walls tremble. He wanted to tell Caleb everything, about the boy he'd loved in secret in high school, about the shame that had kept him silent. But the words wouldn't come. He stood, muttering an excuse, and fled to his apartment, his heart pounding. That night, he dreamed of Caleb's painting, the blues and reds swirling into a storm that swallowed him whole. He woke gasping, the truth clawing at his throat. He couldn't keep running. Not from Caleb, not from himself. The next morning, he knocked on Caleb's door, his hands shaking. When Caleb answered, his expression was guarded, like he was bracing for rejection. Elias took a deep breath, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "I've been hiding. My whole life. I think I'm gay, and I think I'm falling for you." Caleb's eyes widened, and for a moment, the world held its breath. Then he stepped forward, closing the distance, and kissed Elias with a fierceness that stole his breath. It was fire and freedom, fear and hope, all at once. Elias kissed him back, his hands trembling as they found Caleb's shoulders, the world falling away. The kiss changed everything. Elias felt like he'd stepped off a cliff, but instead of falling, he was soaring. Caleb's hands were warm against his face, his lips soft but insistent, and for the first time, Elias let himself feel without fear. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb's smile was no longer dangerous. It was radiant, like the sun breaking through clouds. "About time you caught up," Caleb teased, his voice husky. "I was starting to think I'd have to lock you out again." Elias laughed, his chest light. "Don't tempt fate." They spent the day together, tangled in each other on Caleb's couch, talking and kissing and laughing until the world outside faded. Elias told Caleb about his childhood, about the weight of his family's expectations, about the boy he'd loved but never dared approach. Caleb listened, his fingers tracing patterns on Elias's hand, his presence a steady anchor. "I came out when I was 19, Caleb said, his voice quiet. "It wasn't easy. My dad didn't talk to me for a year, but I couldn't keep pretending. Not for anyone." Elias nodded, his throat tight. "I want that. To be free. But I don't know how." Caleb squeezed his hand. "You don't have to have it all figured out. Just take it one step at a time. I'll be here." Those words carried Elias through the next few weeks, as their relationship deepened. They were careful, keeping their affection private, but every stolen kiss, every shared glance, felt like a rebellion against the fear that had held Elias captive. He started to imagine a life where he could be himself, where he could love without shame. But the world wasn't as kind as Caleb's apartment. One evening, as they walked home from a movie, a group of guys outside a bar shouted slurs, their voices sharp with malice. Elias froze, his hands slipping from Caleb's, his heart pounding with memories of his father's disapproval, his mother's prayers. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't back down, staring the men down until they turned away, muttering. "You okay?" Caleb asked, his voice soft but urgent. Elias nodded, though his hands were shaking. I'm not used to this." Caleb pulled him into an alley, away from prying eyes, and cupped his face. "You don't have to be ready for everything. But you're not alone in this, okay?" Elias leaned into him, drawing strength from his warmth. But the encounter left a mark, a reminder that the world outside their bubble wasn't always safe. He started noticing things, whispers at the coffee shop, a neighbor's sidelong glance. Missoula was small, and secrets didn't stay secret for long. One afternoon, Elias's phone buzzed with a call from his mother. He hadn't spoken to her since moving, dodging her texts with vague replies. Her voice was warm but probing, asking about his job, his apartment, his life. Then she asked, "Have you met anyone special?" Elias's heart stopped. He was sitting in Caleb's apartment, watching him sketch at the kitchen table. He wanted to tell her about Caleb, about the man who made him feel alive. But the words caught in his throat, and he mumbled, "No one yet." When he hung up, Caleb looked up, his pencil still. "You didn't tell her." Elias's cheeks burned. "I'm not ready. It's complicated." Caleb's expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of hurt in his eyes. "I get it. Family's tough. But you can't keep hiding forever, Elias." The words stung, and Elias felt the weight of his own cowardice. He wanted to be brave, like Caleb, but the fear was a living thing, clawing at his chest. That night, he lay awake, torn between the life he was building with Caleb and the one he'd left behind. Could he really have both? Or would loving Caleb mean losing everything else? The next day, Caleb invited him to a community event, a fundraiser for a local LGBTQ center. Elias hesitated, but Caleb's quiet encouragement pushed him to go. The event was vibrant, filled with music and laughter, people of all ages celebrating who they were. Elias felt a pang of longing, a glimpse of a world where he could be free. But when a photographer snapped their picture, Caleb's arm around his shoulders, Elias's stomach twisted. What if someone saw? What if his family found out? Caleb noticed his tension, pulling him aside. "You're scared," he said, not accusing, just stating a fact. Elias nodded, his voice barely audible. "I don't know how to do this. Be out. Be with you." Caleb's eyes softened, but there was a firmness in his voice. "I can't make that choice for you, Elias. But I know what it's like to live half a life. It's not living at all." The words hit like a punch, and Elias felt the ground shift beneath him. He was at a crossroads, and the path he chose would change everything. Elias spent the next few days wrestling with Caleb's words. Living half a life. He saw it now, the way he'd been tiptoeing through his own existence, always looking over his shoulder, always hiding. But the thought of coming out, of facing his family, felt like standing at the edge of a void. He loved Caleb. He knew that now, but love came with a cost he wasn't sure he could pay. One evening, as snow fell outside, Elias found himself at Caleb's door again. Caleb was cooking, the air filled with the scent of garlic and herbs. He looked up, his smile softening the tension in Elias's chest. "You look like you're carrying the world," Caleb said, setting down a wooden spoon. Elias sat at the counter, his hands fidgeting. "I want to be with you. Really be with you. But I'm scared, Caleb. My family, they won't understand." Caleb leaned across the counter, his eyes steady. "I know it's hard. My family wasn't exactly thrilled either. But you deserve to live your truth, Elias. Not just for me, but for you." Elias nodded, tears stinging his eyes. He wanted that truth, wanted it desperately, but the fear was a chain around his heart. Caleb reached for his hand, squeezing it gently, and for a moment, Elias felt like he could breathe. The turning point came unexpectedly. A letter arrived from Elias's mother, handwritten and heavy with her familiar cursive. She wrote about missing him, about the family's hopes for his future, about a cousin's upcoming wedding. At the end, she added, "We just want you to be happy, Mijo." Whatever that means. Elias read the words over and over, searching for a sign. Did she know? Could she accept him? He showed the letter to Caleb, his hands trembling. Caleb read it silently, then looked up, his expression gentle but firm. "She loves you, Elias. Maybe more than you think. But you'll never know unless you try." Elias knew he was right. He couldn't keep running, couldn't keep hiding. That night, he called his mother. The words came haltingly, his voice shaking as he told her about Caleb, about who he was. There was a long silence on the other end, and Elias braced for rejection. But then his mother spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't understand everything, Mijo, but I want to. I want you to be happy." Tears streamed down Elias's face as he hung up, relief and fear tangling inside him. It wasn't acceptance, not fully, but it was a start. He went to Caleb's apartment, falling into his arms, and for the first time, he felt like he could be whole. But the world wasn't done testing them. A week later, as they walked through town, they ran into Derek again. This time, he wasn't alone. 2 other men flanked him, their faces hard. "So this is your new guy," Derek sneered, his eyes raking over Elias. "You always did like the broken ones, Caleb." Caleb stepped in front of Elias, his voice low and dangerous. "Back off, Derek. We're done." Derek laughed, stepping closer. "You think you can just walk away? Pretend you're better than me." The confrontation escalated quickly, words turning to shoves. Elias's heart pounded, fear and anger surging through him. He grabbed Caleb's arm, pulling him back. "He's not worth it," Elias said, his voice steady despite the chaos. Caleb's eyes blazed, but he nodded, stepping back. Derek and his friends left, their laughter echoing down the street. Elias and Caleb stood in silence, the weight of the encounter settling over them. "I'm sorry," Caleb said finally, his voice raw. "I didn't want you to see that." Elias shook his head, taking Caleb's hand. "I'm not going anywhere. Not anymore." That night, they lay together in Caleb's bed, the world outside quiet for once. Elias traced the freckles on Caleb's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steadiness of his breathing. He wasn't naive. He knew there would be more challenges, more moments of doubt. But for the first time, he felt ready to face them, with Caleb by his side. Spring came to Missoula, the snow melting into rivers that sparkled under the sun. Elias and Caleb's relationship bloomed with the season, their days filled with quiet moments and bold steps. Elias started attending events at the LGBTQ Center, finding a community that embraced him, flaws and all. He wasn't fully out, not yet, but each step felt like a victory, a reclaiming of himself. One afternoon, they hiked to a lookout point above the town, the valley sprawling below them in a patchwork of green and gold. Caleb carried a picnic, his laughter echoing as he tripped over a root. Elias caught him, their hands lingering, and they sat on a blanket, sharing sandwiches and stories. "I'm proud of you," Caleb said, his eyes soft. "You're braver than you think." Elias smiled, his heart full. "I wouldn't be here without you." Caleb leaned in, kissing him gently, the world fading to just the two of them. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of fear, of doubt, of whispers from strangers. But Elias was learning to stand tall, to hold Caleb's hand in public, to live without hiding. When Elias's mother visited that summer, he was nervous, his hands sweating as he introduced her to Caleb. She was quiet at first, her eyes searching, but when she saw the way Caleb looked at Elias, her face softened. At dinner, she reached for Elias's hand, squeezing it. "You're happy," she said simply. "That's all I've ever wanted." It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were still conversations to have, bridges to mend. But it was enough. Elias had found a home, not just in Missoula, but in himself. And Caleb, with his dangerous smile and open heart, was the key that had unlocked it all. As they stood on their balcony that night, watching the stars, Elias felt a peace he'd never known. He'd been locked out once, alone in the cold, but Caleb had let him in, not just to his apartment, but to a life where love was possible. And that, Elias knew, was worth everything.